Welcome back to another video. It is a fresh winter's morning today, and we are about to get stuck back into the M43 Turbo build. That runs perfect. So our throttle's stuck. Seems like we don't have any fuel pressure. On top of that, obviously we've seen what potentially could be a blown head gasket. Someone in the comments mentioned that I could get a sharpening stone from the local hardware store that I could use to clean the block and the head and make sure that they're like flat. We're gonna head down to our local hardware store, grab that, and then we're gonna get straight into the details on what you need to turbo your M43 and what you should be doing to do it properly. And we'll go over the different levels that you could spend in your budget and where I would spend my money on the important stuff and where you can get away with some cheaper items. And we'll reinstall the head gasket. Hopefully we can start this thing and actually run properly. So let's get to it. So before we get started putting the head back on the engine, I've laid out all the turbo components and basically everything I think that is like a must-have for doing this. Now obviously this particular car I bought with everything included basically. You know, I bought a few little things, but most of the stuff came with the car because it was already turboed, and I'm just trying to make do with what I've got in the shed. I've turboed a few cars in the past, turbo E36s, but they're all been 6-cylinder. I have a good idea, and I have a spreadsheet of basically everything that I've ever spent on my drift car. So I have a good idea of what things cost and what is, but obviously times change, the sales, you can hunt down deals, you can get things secondhand. Prices are always going to change. So definitely do your due diligence when looking for stuff, but as a starting point, we're going to go through with what you actually need. So obviously, major component is the turbo. Here we have a max speed rods turbo. That's about as cheap as you're going to get it. You're not going to get much cheaper. Will it last forever? Probably not. Do they last considerably good time? Yes. Is this my go-to turbo? No. For something like this, it's probably perfect. You don't want to spend too much money. If you don't have a built motor or anything, like the chances of it failing and going through your engine, it's probably not that likely. So to me, I would take the risk and go with the max speed rods turbo. Now, if you're got a 6-cylinder engine, the engine's a bit more expensive, harder to get. You want it to last. You're street driving the car regularly, like it's a daily driver. I would spend a little bit more on a turbo. I'd probably go get a Pulsar. They're a good happy medium. If you've just got lots of money and you really want the best of the best, go get like a Garrett or something. The quality is definitely there, and side by side a Garrett and a Pulsar, the Garrett still just seems like the build quality is slightly better, but honestly, value for money, Pulsar. Like I run a Pulsar on my drift car, honestly it's a no-brainer. For like $1,100 you get a good turbo and they seem super reliable and they make good power. Moving on, to spin the turbo up, we need a manifold. Now, this is super budget and super rough, and I'm doing it with what I've got, but we have the stock manifold, right? So we're running the stock manifold and we've made this really janky J-pipe. You can see why it's called a J-pipe. And we've made that to bolt onto the stock manifold and loop around and mount our turbo. We'll look closer into how that works further in the series, but basically that's getting our exhaust gases back around to the turbo. If I was to do this from scratch and I didn't have all this stuff already here, I would probably buy a cast manifold, turbo manifold from eBay or something like that, because they are getting really cheap, and you often see people on marketplaces selling full cheap M43 turbo kits. I would probably buy one of them. The next level up would be to custom make a manifold, or get someone to custom make a manifold if you don't know what you're doing with a welder, don't have a welder, etc. A basic log style manifold or something like that, custom made, is probably going to set you back like $800 to $1,000. Prices may have gone up a little bit now, but log style manifolds with steam pipe can be quite cheap. What I'm going to do for you guys is draw up a turbo manifold flange, and I'm going to have it available on birdansunlimited.com. You better buy that and you'll be able to make your own steam pipe manifold. That's one way of doing it. Or if you really want to spend a lot of money, there is companies out there that will do you a high-end custom manifold, or maybe even an off-the-shelf tubular manifold for M43, either bottom mount or top mount. But it all just depends on your budget. And to me, the manifold, yes, it's important. You want it to flow well, but if you're trying to do it on the cheap, it's not something where I'd pour all my money into. A cast manifold is going to work good. J-pipe setups are definitely proven to work and make boost. There's nothing wrong with it. Obviously they're not perfect and ideal, but they do work, so there's no need to go nuts on it. If you really want it to have it nice and like have it last forever, I would probably just buy the flange and get someone to either do it yourself or get someone to make a steam pipe manifold for you basically. The material's pretty cheap, and you know, if you've got a fab mate or you know, someone you're happy to pay, you know, $800 or something, they can probably put together a rough manifold for you. There's plenty of room in an E36 engine bay, E46 engine bay with an M43, so I think you'll be able to make it work. And then yeah, obviously, last resort budget, like what we're doing, J-pipe, it will get the job done nonetheless. So, next up we have wastegate, another crucial, important bit in the turbo setup. So this would be one of my non-negotiables in cheaping out. So I've got here a genuine tile wastegate, and that's what we will be using. Generally, if you cheap out on a wastegate, you can end up having boost issues and potentially blow the motor because it will let the car overboost and yeah, bend a rod or destroy something mechanical. So something not to cheap out. My go-to is usually a Turbo Smart. Tile's usually a little bit more expensive, but see what you can get second hand. Second tile wastegates often found second hand. Just make sure everything still works mechanically and it's got all the bits for it that you need. So next we're going to talk about joining these three components together. So you got your turbo manifold, J-pipe, etc. Your turbo, your wastegate. You're going to need flanges. So Burnouts Unlimited also sell these. So that's your T3 flange for there. Then you need an output flange for your turbo, for your dump pipe. We're going to be doing a hood dump for this. So we haven't done the flange yet, but we're hoping to have the turbo sit around here somewhere, and then the dump will just come out the bonnet like that. That's super simple, super cheap way of doing it. You do have to look into the rules where you are, whether you can do that. Obviously with a street car, it's not going to work. This is a full-blown drift car, and it's just the easiest way. We do have a full exhaust that we could plumb it back into, but for now, just to get it working and everything, we're just going to do it straight out the bonnet. Hopefully we can even shoot some flames and stuff, so that'll be pretty cool, but yeah, just kind of keep it basic for now, get it working, get it tried and tested, and then we'll slowly upgrade things as we go. Now, these are the cheaper alternative to V-bands and all that kind of stuff. The wastegate in this is V-band. I generally go flanges, like laser cut flanges over V-bands where I can, just because they're stronger when they get hit and easier to get back together if you do actually damage your exhaust, etc. So on here, we'll weld on that T3 flange onto here, and that's how we'll be mounting our turbo. Next thing to keep in mind when you're doing that is bracing. This is a long pipe that's going to have a lot of weight hanging off it, so we may weld some rod onto this to back tie it back to the manifold or somewhere in the car that gives it some support so we don't induce cracks in our welding once that's fully welded, etc. Next up, a very crucial part to the turbo build. Now, this is arguably something that you may not need. This is an aftermarket ECU. Now, it's got racing electronics on it. I'm going to link in the description the link to this ECU. This is a company, I think it's in the UK or something like that, but they are low cost racing solutions or something like that, and they make ECU, plug and play ECUs for all the BMW motors, so M52, M50, M43, etc. It's basically a Mega Squirt, so it uses the same software as a Mega Squirt or any of the ones like that. That is what I would do if I was trying to do it as cheap as possible. I think they're around $500, but that is like the absolute cheapest thing that I would do. Like, you can get away, it is definitely proven that you can run the stock ECU and just bump up the fuel pressure regulator with different injectors and you can get it to work. It's never going to be perfect, and these days people can tune the stock ECU. That's all good and well. I like to be able to look at what's going on in the ECU. My personal preference is still not this. This is the absolute cheapest option I would go. For the price, it's almost a no-brainer these days, and it will be better than the stock ECU. You can properly tune it, fully tunable, plug it into the computer, check for fault codes, all that kind of stuff, which we'll be going through that when we get the car on the dyno. But ideally, I would be putting a link ECU in it. So that's my go-to ECU, but you could get a link ECU and you could wire it in. If you're not good at wiring, you'd have to pay someone or find someone. There's other options. You can put it at Haltech or Max ECU or ECU Master, anything like that. They all work. My advice is go within what's your budget. If you have more money to spend on some items, I would be spending the most on the ECU because it will last you forever. So if you go buy a Link ECU and you get like their Storm or whatever, you get their wiring ECU, you can keep that ECU regardless of what car you have. So you can wire it to the M43 Turbo and you progress, your driving gets better and you end up with an S chassis with an SR20. You can rewire that ECU to do it, and they'll also hold their value because people will want that, and they're tunable. Most tuners can do a Link or a Haltech these days. Like, there's not anyone that's really going to turn around and say, no, I can't tune that, which is often the problem with people. A lot of decent tuners don't want to touch some of the rubbish ECUs. But they do work, they definitely do work, and we'll go over more of that later, but it's just something to consider. In my other drift car, I went down the path, I went Link ECU from the get-go as soon as I turboed because I didn't want to have issues, and I taught myself the software, and now I can fault find problems really simple at the track. So, you know, carry a laptop and it makes your life a little bit easier. But yeah, that's just something to think about, and if I was going to save up and spend the most on anything, that's what I'd spend it on. Again, my opinion, but that's just what works for me. And there's definitely people out there doing it cheaper, but it's up to you whether you want to take the risk. Next up, we've got the intercooler. All right. Now, technically you don't need an intercooler, but your intake temps will be high, which will then pull timing, etc., and can get detonation and all that kind of stuff. We have a really small intercooler that came with the car and a heap of intercooler piping. So this was all already plumbed up, ready. So you've got heaps of this, silicons. You can just buy a cheap kit if you head to Max Speeding Rods or eBay or something like that. You can just buy this cheap kit and you can just cut it up, and if you can weld, you can join bits on. Otherwise, you can do silicon and hose clamps. The less silicon and the less hose clamps, the better, because it just, you know, chasing boost leaks or having hoses pop off is less likely. This intercooler is quite small, but for the power pushing out of the larger turbo, I think it's going to be perfectly fine. And we'll just take the risk and see how it goes, and we'll go from there. For the turbo to stay cool and lubricated, we need to feed it oil. So here we have an oil feed line. So you can just buy a generic oil feed line because that's all this one is, with the banjo fitting on it. And you just need this small adapter. So often you can just go to your local fitting store and buy these, but places like Raceworks, Aeroflow, all that often sell adapters that go from the thread where your oil pressure sensor plugs into. They also have a spot for your oil pressure sensor to go back in, so that's what this has got. So it just plugs into where the oil pressure sensor plugs into. Then you put the oil pressure sensor in and you can feed off that for your oil feed line. Now, obviously you feed it oil, you gotta have it drain the oil. So this goes on the bottom of the turbo. Most of the turbos will come with the oil drain fitting, and you'll need to make up a hose. So this one's got a fitting, it's a bit rough, and then it's got a 90, like it's a basic, like a plumber's fitting. It's not really. Returning the oil back to the engine. There's a couple ways you can do this. I prefer to run my oil drains back to the sump. There's a couple ways you can do this. The way I'd like to do it in my cars is to take the sump off and get the fitting welded into the sump or the timing cover. So we have our timing cover off now. We could be welding a fitting into here, and that could allow us to run the oil feed back into there, or we could do it down further on this timing cover. I have either the building myself or I know someone who can weld that on for me. If you don't, you can drill and tap. So you could just drill into this and put a really like half nut on the back basically and run it back there, so that excludes welding or anything like that. If you're going to drill into your sump, I recommend draining the oil, getting the flakes out, cleaning it up nicely, and then tapping into the sump. This car in particular has like a really dodgy, which I'll show you here, has a really dodgy fitting pushed into the side of the sump and siliconed in. I don't recommend that. It will work, but there's nothing worse going to a track day and having your car leak oil on the track or not passing scrutineering because of that. So honestly, just take the time and do it properly. And if you use like a sealing washer or something, O-ring on it, just try not to no, it's just not worth it. Just do it right the first time and have trouble-free track days or driving. So, all right, next most important, with the turbo, we're putting more air into the engine, and to make more power, we need more air and more fuel. So here we have our injectors. So these are 950cc sonic injectors. They're a cheap injector. I think they're just like an eBay injector, but they claim to be 950cc, so let's hope that is correct. They did work running on this car on E85, so we're not changing them today. We're going to see how we go once we get on the dyno, and we'll work everything out ourselves. But yes, injectors, definitely something you need to upgrade. You probably don't need to go to 950 cc's for a 1.8, 1.9 M43, but try to find out roughly what your power target is and then base the injectors off that. So for example, my old M52 setup made 300 kilowatt on 800 cc injectors. So this has got 950 cc injectors and we're not making 300 kilowatts. So, you know, these injectors are quite big. I could definitely get away with smaller injectors, more around like 500 cc, 400 cc. But get online, jump in and do a bit of a calculator, work out what your power goals are and then decide on an injector. I generally run Deutschwerks or something like that. That's just my go-to. I trust them, put them in there. That or Bosch. Obviously Bosch is a big brand. And yeah, these days you can just get lots of different adapters that suit the different inlet manifolds and stuff. Anyway, swap them out. Stock rail works perfectly fine. Don't bother swapping that unless you really want to. Now, we do have an aftermarket TurboSmart fuel pressure regulator. Does mean we can keep an eye on fuel pressure accurately and we can have it referenced to boost. It is not necessary, but it does help. So again, if it's in your budget, then you can do that. If it's not, you will get away with the stock one and you can crimp the stock ones to give them a bit more pressure if you need a bit more pressure. And another thing that you might want to add once you go turbo is an oil catch can. With the extra boost and the rings being old and worn or whatever, not gapped correctly for boost, you will get some blow by. Not all engines are going to get blow by, but if you are getting blow by, you want to be able to catch it instead of feeding it all back into your engine and gunking up the valves and stuff. So catch cans are cheap. That's just an eBay one. It does the job. Put a fitting in your rocker cover, just press it in like this, and basically run the hose out there and vent it into the catch can. And last but not least, I just want to touch on a bit of a controversial one, but these things. So most of you probably know these as a boost tee. I hate them. Can't stand them. I will not be putting this in the car. I've never seemed to have had good luck with them. So we had one of these on Jason's built motor and no matter what we did, it didn't seem to make any changes and then the car continued to overboost. So we never really worked out why, and then I've had other friends that have ran them and you know they do nothing on the dyno and you're adjusting them and then you go and drift the car for the first time and all of a sudden it's overboosting. Basically it is the cheapest option, but if I really wanted to go cheap, I would just run the correct size wastegate spring, correct size turbo, and get the boost controlled that way. I just find them unreliable and I've heard bad things about them and I've never had any luck with them, and honestly, it's just not worth the risk basically. If you want to control your boost properly and your ECU allows it, I would go to a Mac valve. A Mac valve is an electronically controlled solenoid that basically does the same thing as this, but it's controlled electronically and it bleeds the air off. They're quite cheap, but you need something to control it. So if you don't go and link ECU or an aftermarket standalone ECU, you won't be able to control like the boost with the Mac valve and your ECU. There is other options though. You can go get a GFB boost controller, which is separate to everything, and you can program that to open and close the Mac valve. They also work. These days now they have an understanding of the link ECU controlling the Mac valve, and it just makes it simpler. Everything's done in there when the car's tuned, and basically you never have to touch it again. It just does its job and you can trust that it's going to always keep your boost where it needs to be. Anyways, that's enough talking. I just want to get all this information to you guys so you could get an understanding of what's required when you start turboing your M43. But now we're going to continue turboing this M43. We're going to get the head back on. We're going to get a new head gasket on. We're going to clean the surfaces. But for now, we're going to get back to putting the head back on the M43. We're going to clean the head and the block, and we're going to put it all back together and get it running. So let's get to it. So our local hardware store didn't have many options when it came to a sharpening stone. We grabbed this. This was the cheapest one. There was another one that was like 30 bucks, but they really didn't look that much different, and I don't really know much about it, but I think it'll do the job. It was $5, so that's good. We have some WD-40, so you got to do it while it's wet, something similar to WD-40 or WD-40. So spray the head and spray the stone. Make sure it's all wet. And then we're just going to go over the head in a circular motion. Again, I'm kind of just, I got no idea what I'm doing, but the head seems pretty square. We've scraped all the stuff off it and this seems to be cleaning it up nicely. Won't do it too much, but just give it a nice surface for the gasket to bite into. Item I forgot to mention before, this is a aftermarket fuel pump. So generally more fuel, you're gonna need more fuel pressure, gonna need a bigger, higher flowing pump. This one is out of a Turbo M52 car. It's a spare that we carry around in our spares box, so we're gonna use that. This also, we believe, may have a failing fuel pump, so perfect opportunity to swap it over. I think this had an E85 safe pump or like an upgraded pump in it, but it's not working at the moment, so we're just gonna chuck this one in there. This is like a Walbro 450 or something like that. But yeah, that's definitely something else you need to buy, especially if you're gonna run E85. You need more fuel and you're gonna need something that lasts a bit longer with E85. So get on top of that. All the surfaces are clean. Give them a wipe down and we're just gonna open up the head gasket now. Of course, I've got no tools to open up the head gasket. So. Are you fucking serious? Jason, for the first time ever, has decided that he's gonna actually fix his car and he has to do it when I'm filming. Yeah, as I was saying, I'm gonna open up the head gasket and here's our head gasket, more plastic. So take note with the head gasket, they're not symmetrical. So you've got a tab here and there is writing with the L-ring one, there is writing here that says front and on this side it says top. So just make sure you take note. Goes like that. So we're just going to locate it on the dowels and push the head gasket onto the block. Nicely like that. Make sure all the ports and galleries line up. It's locating pretty well on there. And obviously we've got the engine locked in. We locked the crank in. So we have it sitting at top dead center. And now I'm going to get Grady to help me lift the head onto the engine. And we'll lower it in there. And yeah, hopefully it doesn't give us too many issues. Then we'll put the timing chain and all that back on and start reassembling the engine. You just got to kind of help guide me in, go around that side. A tiny baby little head. And we just doesn't matter because the axle's fucked. Forward, does it have to go?
No, yeah. Down. You had it pretty good, yeah. I think that's it.
That's on the dowels. Just like that. That's that easy. I'm gonna leave this in real time because that was ridiculously easy, and doing that with a 6-cylinder sucks. So yeah, and it's also very cold, so you know. Now we're going to reattach our timing chain to the cam, make sure the cam is where it should be in relation to the crank, and we'll bolt that on. That's the first step, and then we'll work our way at putting the all the head bolts back in, all the new head bolts, and secure the head properly to the block. And this is where it all started to go downhill. Unfortunately, the microphone went flat and I didn't realize, so all the audio in these clips and a couple of other clips I filmed had zero audio. For some reason, the iPhone mic didn't take over and it just left me with video footage and no audio. But here I'm showing you that I've installed the head studs by hand. Now, prior to doing this, we actually removed the head one more time and just double checked the top dead center of the engine. We just didn't want to get anything wrong. We're being safe, so we pulled the head off again, refitted the head. Now, if we go back and have a quick look, here you can actually see when we reinstalled the head, the timing chain is sticking outside the head and it's just wedged under the head. Now, we'd already done it once, it was so easy the first time. We were focusing on the top side of the head and it felt like it located really good and it didn't really rock or anything. So we didn't pick up that the chain was stuck under the head and we proceeded to reinstall the head bolts. So put them all in by hand. And then I moved on and slowly started torquing the head bolts down in the pattern that it says on the paperwork for the head bolts. The weird part is nothing really felt out of the ordinary. So I just continued to do up the first bolt and moved on to the second bolt. And the second bolt is when we started to have some issues. As you can see here, I'm starting to torque up the second bolt. I'm happy. It's cold. I want to get inside. We're making progress, and this engine's going back together. So I'm probably not in the best frame of mind. And then all of a sudden, bang. As you can see, the head all of a sudden just drops onto the block and seats correctly. At first, we had no idea what was going on, and then we seen the big chunk missing from the head. Unfortunately, this is probably the worst thing that could possibly have happened. Obviously, the head's ready to go in the car, and now we have an oily, broken head that we need to somehow repair before we can even think about putting the head back on the car. This is probably the dumbest thing I think I've ever done working on a car. It would have to be, it's definitely up there, and I think it is probably the dumbest thing I've ever done working on a car. So as you've seen, we were torquing the head back on. What you didn't see on camera was we were a little bit unsure about the timing, so we were just, we pulled the pin out of the crank and went to reset it and just made sure that it was top dead center. I actually pulled the head back off just to ensure and check visually the pistons were where they needed to be, and the engine was definitely at top dead center. I haven't done it on this car before. And when I put the head back on for the second time, which I didn't film because the first time we filmed putting the head on, I didn't worry about filming the second time. Pretty confident the timing chain was just caught in the edge of the head. So the head, where the head sits, the timing chain is somewhat in front of it, and I had it laid over the bottom, the lower timing cover, and it was flopped over the side, but it clearly had one link just caught on the edge of the head. Now when I put it on, I pushed evenly like this, felt good, and went onto the dowels on the top, all perfect along the side, and I pushed it, and we'd already had the engine on, the head on the engine once, and it went on really easy, so I didn't really question it the second time. It went on easy. We checked the front thing, I pushed on it, didn't rock, felt good, and I thought, sweet. So we put all the bolts in, did all the head bolts hand tight, and then obviously you've seen us starting to torque it. Torqued the first bolt to spec, no problems. Went to torque the second bolt, and bang, and the head moved. And this exploded out of the side of the head. So this is the front section, you kind of look over here. This is the front section of the head, and it was in here somewhere, like this. Doesn't want to fit in there now, and it was pushing down on the chain just at the front here. Chain must have been sitting like this and just caught under the side of it, and this just blew out the side of it as I was doing up the second head bolt. So that puts us in a really shit position. Yeah, I'm not confident that we could weld this back in and repair this head, but that potentially is an option. I'll have a chat to some of my mates and see if that's an option. I guess it is. I guess we can, if we clean it well enough, or a dirty oil, we could potentially weld it back in, but it is cast alloy and it is soaked in oil. The other option is to buy a second-hand head off someone, which just isn't really great timing for. I don't really have the money just to go buy another head. And the third option would be to get the head off the purple car that's in the paddock. Now, we have no idea of the condition of that head, and that engine does tick a lot. So, not really my go-to idea, but yeah, that's going to put an end to this video really shortly, so apologies. It is what it is. We'll fix it somehow. Just my luck, but we will finish this car one day, I promise. And we'll see you in the next one.